was supposed to be a dream vacation for best friends Dean, Richie, Jessica, and Wayne had escaped from the monotony of everyday life. After months of planning, they set out on a deep-sea fishing adventure, eager to catch the biggest fish they'd ever seen. But from the moment they boarded the boat, something didn't feel right. The boat was old, battered by years of salt water, and seemed far from seaworthy. The edges of the hull had cracks, and the wood creaked ominously beneath their feet. The captain, a grizzled man with a weathered face, only shrugged when they asked about the boat's condition. "Don't worry, folks. She's a good old girl. We've made this trip 100 times," the captain had said with a raspy chuckle. They shrugged it off. It was a once-in-a-lifetime trip, and they didn't want to ruin the mood with their concerns. They laughed and joked as the boat cut through the waves, heading out farther into the open sea. But then the weather turned. What had started as a calm, peaceful day quickly spiraled into chaos. Dark clouds gathered overhead, blocking the sun. The wind howled and the sea grew violent, tossing the boat around like a toy in the storm. Waves slammed against the sides and the boat creaked and groaned in protest. Dean, the most daring of the group, tried to maintain the optimism. "It's just a storm. It'll pass soon," he shouted over the roar of the wind. But deep down, even he knew something wasn't right. The storm worsened, and before they knew it, the boat was headed straight for a jagged cluster of rocks. There was no way to steer out of it. The boat crashed against the rocks with a deafening sound, throwing them all violently to the deck. The world spun as water rushed in from every direction. They were lucky to survive the crash. The boat was wrecked, torn apart by the rocks, but somehow they were alive. Struggling against the tide, they managed to make it to shore. What they hadn't expected, however, was where they had washed up. They were on an island and isolated, desolate place with thick, dark trees and the scent of decay in the air. The sand felt cold beneath their feet, and the heavy atmosphere made it hard to breathe. As they stumbled forward trying to get their bearings, they heard a rustling from the jungle. It was then that they saw them. A group of people emerged from the trees, their eyes wide and unblinking. Their skin was smeared with strange, dark paint, and they wore tattered clothing made from animal hides. The sight alone sent a chill down their spines. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward and spoke in a language none of them understood. His eyes glinted with a cold, hungry look that unsettled them all. Before anyone could react, the group was surrounded. The strangers moved quickly, their movements almost too fast for the eye to follow. Richie tried to fight back, but he was overpowered in an instant. Jessica screamed, but her cries were silenced by a thick, callous hand over her mouth. Wayne grabbed Dean's arm, pulling him toward the jungle, but Dean hesitated. His eyes locked with Richie's, then with Jessica's. They didn't have time to think. "They're not going to let us go," Dean said, his voice low and filled with terror. And then they knew. They weren't just stranded on an island. They were in the territory of a tribe of cannibals. Panic set in. They tried to run, to fight, but there were too many of them. One by one, they were dragged deeper into the island, away from any hope of escape. The last thing Dean saw before they captured him was the face of the leader smiling wickedly, holding a sharp, jagged knife. It was all over for Dean. They made him kneel on the ground, bound his arms, and forced him to watch as they began the ritual. Richie, Jessica, and Wayne fought with everything they had, but they were no match for the tribe. Richie managed to break free for a brief moment, but he was quickly overwhelmed. The last screams he let out echoed in the jungle, a sound that haunted Wayne and Jessica long after it faded. The tribal people circled around Dean, chanting in their language. His body trembled, but he didn't scream. Instead, he stared at his friends, the ones who couldn't save him, and whispered something barely audible. "I'm sorry." And then they cut him. Wayne and Jessica managed to escape into the forest, running as fast as they could. They stumbled through the dense underbrush, guided only by the dim light of the moon and the sound of their own ragged breathing. Their hope was fleeting and their fear was overwhelming. For days, they were hunted. The tribe didn't stop, but Jessica didn't make it. Wayne ran as fast as his legs would carry him, until the island finally spit him out onto a beach where a passing cargo ship picked him up. The moment he stepped onto the deck, he collapsed trembling. He survived. But at what cost? The ship took him back to civilization, but the memories of that island, of Dean and Jessica's screams, haunted him. He couldn't tell anyone what had happened, not without them thinking he was insane. To this day, he wakes up with nightmares. Sometimes he hears Dean's voice, faint but unmistakable, whispering from the darkness. I'm sorry, Wayne never went back. He couldn't. The island was lost to him, and perhaps that was for the best. I hope